supporters for this event. One of them is the German Academic Exchange Service and Karl Siebel and other people who have made it possible for us to be here today. I want to thank them all. But I want to make one more reference to someone who is here with us today who would not have made it possible for me to be standing on this podium 30 years ago, and that's Gerald Livingston, who is the founding director of AICGS. Jerry, can you stand up and take a bow? Well deserved, and a lot of people in this room owe Jerry a lot, me probably the most, but I just wanted to point that out, that he's with us, and Jerry, we thank you for everything you've done to make it possible to be here today. Without any further ado, Minister Roesler, it's a great honor to have you with us, and the floor is yours, sir. Thank you for coming.
Dr. James, Ambassador Murphy, Ambassador Boyden-Gray, Ambassador Ammon, Member of the German Parliament Harald Leibrecht, Mrs. Karlutkevich, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. So thank you very much for inviting me to this symposium today. Mr. James, this also gives me the opportunity to congratulate you on 30 years of the American Institute. You have done great work to strengthen German-American relations, whether it be through numerous field trips to Germany or through various publications, conferences, and discussions. And today's event also shows your intuitive feel for the pulse of transatlantic relations. In fact, the timing couldn't be better. Negotiations on a transatlantic trade and investment partnership are about to commence, and President Obama will shortly be visiting Berlin. We are very much looking forward to having him here. The location couldn't be more fitting either. Berlin, the city in which President Kennedy once spoke his famous words. Words which, for us Germans, continue to symbolize the unbreakable friendship of the Americans still today. And the topic couldn't be more current. Today's symposium will focus on the central question of how to consolidate our budgets while still stimulating economic growth. This is a pertinent question both for Germany and the Eurozone, as well for the USA. One of the most convincing answers lies in an old, but by no means outdated idea. The idea of free trade and free investment. Today, this idea is once again the focus of our transatlantic relations. Our panel is about to examine whether the massive venture of establishing a transatlantic trade and investment partnership is just a hype, or whether there really is reason to believe it can be done. I believe that we have every prospect to arrive at an ambitious and extensive agreement. And there are three reasons why. First, the political will to achieve a successful conclusion is present on both sides. President Obama gave a clear signal in favor of such an agreement in his State of the Union address. Chancellor Merkel has declared the project one of the highest priorities for economic policy. And our European partners are also providing a vast amount of support. All of the European stakeholders are in favor of the agreement, even if many of the details still need to be discussed, for example, with our French colleagues. In addition, companies and business associations on both sides of the Atlantic have been very receptive. Rarely has a free trade initiative been met with such a positive response. we simply cannot afford to dash these expectations. The project is too big to fail. Second, Europe and the US must think global. The Transatlantic Partnership is for both sides an anchor of stability in a rapidly changing world. The US remains Germany's first export market outside Europe and also the market where German companies invest the most. Together, the EU and US account for almost half of global output, a third of global trade, and a third of all patent applications. These are all impressive statistics, but we cannot afford to rest on our laurels. The emerging economies in Asia and Latin America will continue to grow much more rapidly than us. In just 3 years' time, China could replace the US as the world's largest economic power, and India is on a similar path. We need to take this on board and respond accordingly in order to secure our prosperity in the long term. The trade policy focus on both sides of the Atlantic has already shifted to the fast-growing markets in Asia. Both the EU and the US have concluded free trade agreements with South Korea, for instance. This is the right road to take. But we now need to concentrate on further expanding our own partnership too, on extending the bridge across the Atlantic. Both sides are aware of the strategic importance of this and are conscious of the growth potential. Third, not all free trade agreements build on shared values. A free trade agreement between the US and Europe certainly will. Our partnership is one of equals. Neither of us faces insurmountable obstacles in order to move towards the other side. We have similar notions of what level of protection should apply when it comes to consumers or safeguarding the environment. And of course, a lot of useful preparatory work has already been done over the past year or more by the EU-US high-level working group on jobs and growth. We should therefore avoid creating taboos at this stage, but should seek to solve all the problems in the negotiation process. We will make every effort to do so, and this is also the clear position of Mike Froman. Our project is ambitious, very ambitious indeed. However, it can be done, and we will do it. We will go on to create a forward-looking trade and investment framework, a framework that meets the demands of the 21st century. We want to reduce barriers to trade and investment across the entire economy. In transatlantic trade in particular, each tariff not only directly raises production costs for our companies, at the same time, it also lowers their international competitiveness. Tariffs act like a tax. It is therefore in our mutual interest to eliminate these tariffs, even if they are generally low. We also want to significantly reduce non-tariff barriers to trade. If a company from Europe or the US decides to engage in transatlantic trade, non-tariff barriers to trade will push up the costs for that company by an average of 10 to 20%. For foodstuffs, this figure can even rise to 70% due to additional packaging requirements or differing product standards. The additional costs are passed on to the consumer in higher costs and less choice. Many people remain unaware of this. We must find innovative ways to change course. This is the only means to fully unlock the potential in our economic relations. Studies show that the EU and the US can both profit massively from a joint trade area. The EU is set to benefit by almost 120 billion euros each year, and the US by around 95 billion. The global economy will also gain from a transatlantic partnership. Let's say we created a harmonized standard for airbags, for example. This wouldn't mean that Japanese or Korean car manufacturers would no longer have to produce two different models in order to serve both markets. This would also save them money. Third countries could benefit from an additional welfare effect of $100 billion. If these countries were to later adopt such standards for themselves, this would only work in our favor. This could also lend fresh impetus to the WTO negotiations. We will continue to work towards the successful conclusions to the Doha round. Only if we have the same rules for all, we can ensure that there's fair competition on the world markets. It is clear that there's much to be gained for all sides. At the same time, there are major challenges still to be overcome. In order to master these challenges, we must learn from previous experience. A lesson learned from the failure of the ACTA agreement is that we cannot hold negotiations behind closed doors. We must involve the public and companies, especially when it comes to such sensitive topics such as consumer protection and, very current, data privacy. We also need to closely involve our parliaments from the very outset. Transparent negotiations are key when it comes to the acceptance and success of the agreements. This will help us to counter misconceptions, and if governments, companies, associations and institutes like yours all pull in the same direction, to also bring home the advantage of the agreement. A transatlantic trade and investment partnership does not mean that Europe or the US must reduce the level consumer, health and environmental protection. We must, for example, dispel the widespread belief in Europe that food safety standards in the US are lower than in Europe. And in the other direction, we must counter the misconceptions in the US that Europeans only use their rules and requirements to fence off the agricultural markets. Citizens on both sides of the Atlantic share the same values and therefore rightly expect a high level of consumer and environmental protection. They simply have different means to the same end. And this is a good thing. We both have our own unique culture, traditions, and practices. We are not seeking full harmonization in every area. This would not be possible anyways. We don't have to go as far as harmonizing our power sockets, for example. Rather, what is needed is agreement on what is fundamentally equivalent, and in certain cases, agreement on mutual recognition of standards, as is the case, for example, with our airplanes. They fly all over the world and are authorized to operate in all of the countries they serve, despite differences in the systems and technology used. We must also work on finding similar solutions for other sectors. And we should certainly seek to identify new and innovative pathways in this. For instance, car makers have proposed to recognize one another's rules unless these do not meet safety and environmental requirements. Thus, the negotiations also offer the massive opportunity to shift through our own routes, eliminate unnecessary requirements, and continue to cut red tape. So, ladies and gentlemen, transatlantic relations are entering a new era. Exciting times lie ahead. The Council of Trade Ministers of the EU will decide on the EU mandate for the negotiations in Luxembourg on Friday with our French colleagues. Right from the outset, the German government and I personally have called for the European side to adopt a negotiation mandate which is as open and ambitious as possible. We withdrew our last reservations in Brussels today, thus making the way clear for the adoption of a comprehensive mandate. I hope that we will be joined by other EU partners. We will use this great opportunity to boost prosperity. Europe and the US are not only united by their joint history, but also by our notions of a free and democratic society. Through free trade, open markets, and ever stronger ties between our two societies, we are continuing to tread this path. Our journey is not complete. We are showing the world how we can shape a future of lasting peace, freedom, and prosperity. We want to work on this together. So, thank you very much for your attention.